Chapter 61 Jealous. Just as Jianyun was about to say something else, her phone rang, cutting her off. Give me a second. She turned her phone over to see that the call was from Cheng Mu's. Hello? She immediately picked it up, glancing at the clock. Sister Jian, are you here yet? He sounded anxious, and from the beeping sounds in the background, it seemed that he had only grown even busier by each second. Do you mind coming up now? The meeting's about to start at 9:30. But I can't leave. However, before she could say anything else, he already hung up. The last thing she needed was for any more stories to run the gossip mill, but it seemed that he didn't give her much of a choice on that matter. With a sigh, she rubbed the creases on her forehead, looking a bit stumped about the entirety of her situation. Seeing as Cheng Mu still hadn't replied, she grabbed the metallic box from her bag and walked out of their department office, ignoring Wu Wenjing's confused gaze. It was now or never. What Jianyun didn't expect was to see a man holding a bouquet of roses as soon as she had stepped out of the HR department. Just as she was about to overstep him and head straight to the elevator, he quickly blocked her path, and the red roses were immediately pushed up to her face. The flowery scent entered her nostrils, and she resisted the urge to sneeze. Miss Jian. The man behind the bouquet looked extremely young, probably no more than 30 years old. He had a sweet face, and he didn't look all that bad. I'm sorry, who are you? She blinked, surprised that the man knew her name. At her question, the man blushed even more. I'm Luo Ziwa from the logistics department. I've liked you for a long time now, and, he stuttered, trying to look at anywhere but her face. You're really pretty. This is for you. After he finished speaking, Luo Ziwa immediately threw the bouquet into her arms and ran off the other direction, not bothering to look back. It took Jianyun a minute to register what had just happened. Glancing at the roses in her hands, a stupefied expression masked her face. Although she didn't want to accept the roses, she'd feel bad if she'd just throw them away, especially just after receiving them. Seeing as she didn't have any other choice, she carried the bouquet in her arms and stepped into the elevator. At this moment, Hui snuck into the HR manager's office and quickly reported to her. Sister Bingbing, there must be something important in Jianyun's bag, because I just saw her taking it up to the 28th floor. That shameless bitch, Xia Bingbing snarled, nearly flipping the table in anger. Her long manicured fingernails tore through the document she was holding as she clenched her jaw. She must have brought it to seduce Liancheng. Listen to this, there was even a man who delivered flowers to her just now. Hui thought back to the large bouquet the man had been holding before rolling her eyes. Are those blind or something? If they really want to give flowers, the least they could do is give it to someone who's more deserving of them. Sister Bingbing, you're obviously prettier than Jianyun. Does the slut think she could easily get what she wants just by hooking up with a few men? Just you wait. I'll drive her out of Ming's so fast that she wouldn't know what hit her. A venomous glint shone in the woman's face as she gripped the edges of her table. Xia Bingbing had always thought so highly of herself, and when she saw Huo Liancheng, she had fallen for him almost immediately. Not only was he rich, but he was also the most handsome man she had ever seen. In fact, with his perfect background, he was the only man she regarded as her equal. That night in the coffee shop, she had decided to confess her feelings to him. What she didn't expect was for him to coldly reject her and leave her there as if nothing had happened. She had sworn that very day that she would chase him like her life depended on it, and there was no way she was going to give just because some woman decided to have the nerve to stand against her. This was the second time Jianyun went to the CEO's office. The first time was when she was planning to ask for her glasses back, only to be greeted with a wide empty space. This time, the sight that had greeted her wasn't any different. In fact, besides Huo Liancheng himself, Cheng Mu's office was the only one that was there. She couldn't help but wonder the weight of Huo Liancheng's job to have just one assistant to take care of all his company matters. As soon as she stepped out of the elevator, she glanced at the CEO's office, then at Cheng Mu's. There were stacks of paper piling up on his desk, and he seemed to be focused on the documents he was transcribing into his computer. Jianyun blanched at the sight. He certainly wasn't lying when he said he was busy. Seeing this, she walked towards him and placed the box on his desk. Cheng Mu jumped from his seat, looking as if he was seeing her for the first time. He adjusted the rim of his glasses. I didn't even hear you walk in. You scared the crap out of me. He exhaled, patting his chest. Placing a finger on her lips, she hissed. Shh, the honeysuckle flowers are here. I should leave. Although Jianyun's impression of Huo Liancheng had improved a little from their last interaction, Luo Yanyan's words had made her a bit uncomfortable about their newfound friendship. A part of her was afraid that if she saw him right now, her friend's prediction would come to life. That their friendship would be a transaction, one that she had no chance of partaking in. As soon as she delivered the items, she quickly turned her head and prepared to leave the 28th floor. Being here was already enough to make her nervous. Why are you in such a hurry to leave? Yo, are these for you? Who gave them? Cheng Mu placed the documents back on his desk. Seeing the large bouquet in her arms, he took advantage of her distractedness and pulled out the card on the top. His eyebrows twitched, and he grinned. From Luoziwa? Who's that? Fourth bro. It seems like you got some competition here. Hey! The tips of her ears were tinged red as he said the last sentence. She tried to snatch the card from his fingertips, but he raised them high enough that her jumps were to no avail. Stomping her foot in frustration, she scowled. However, just as Jianyun was about to say something else, the door to the CEO's office had creaked open. All the anger scouring through her veins vanished, and she immediately retreated into the elevator. The hairs at the back of her neck stood. Screw the flowers. Sister Jian, your flowers. Cheng Muze watched, amused by her flustered expression. I don't want it. It's yours. Seeing as he still hadn't stepped out of his office, she breathed a sigh of relief and closed the elevator without looking back. In the huge office, Cheng Muze glanced at Huo Liancheng's darkened expression and bit back a laugh. Fourth bro, why is it that every time Sister John sees you, she runs off like a mouse? He tutted, teasing him. Did you do something to scare her? That really is no way to get a girl. Huo Liancheng didn't say anything else. Instead, he stretched out his hand and motioned to the bouquet. When Cheng Muze handed it to him, he immediately disposed of them, narrowing his eyes in displeasure. However, before he could say anything else, the man was quickly handed a metallic box. Fourth brother, Sister Jian brought this for you, Cheng Muze stated. With a nod, he grabbed the box and went straight into his office. Sitting on his chair, Huo Liancheng fiddled with the leaf-shaped box. The cold metal grazed against his fingertips, and when he lifted the lid, a sweet scent floated through the small opening. A small smile slipped into his lips, and he quickly picked up his phone. When Jianyun had finally returned to the HR department, her cheeks were flushed, and her knees were quaking. Why do you have to run away? What's wrong with you? She thought to herself as she struggled to cool herself down. It wasn't as if she had just committed a grave offense. All she had done was follow out Cheng Muze's orders. There was nothing wrong with that. She gritted her teeth, resisting the urge to pull her hair in frustration. Oh well. It wasn't as if she could do anything about it now. When she returned to her desk, she noticed that her phone had a new message from Huo Liancheng. Guilt crept up into her chest as she clicked it open. The flowers were ugly. You're not allowed to accept any more flowers from him or from any other man. Jianyun rolled her eyes. It isn't any of your business. Huo Liancheng stayed silent after that. However, just as she was about to return to work, she was immediately bombarded with several emojis that Wu Wenjing had sent over in quick succession. Did someone just give you flowers? Once she had caught Jianyun's attention, she quickly asked. Yeah, but I don't even know him. A lot of our coworkers are asking about you, you know. They wanted to know whether you have a boyfriend or not, Wu Wenjing replied. In fact, some of them even asked me for your number, but I didn't give it to them. Please don't. Suddenly a thought occurred to Jianyun. Wait, do you still have Brother Poo's number? The one from Xinhua Club? Why do you want to know? Chapter 62, Push him down. That's the only job that pays fast. Jianyun sent the message before adding, You know how the money I've saved up is only enough for my mother's surgery, and I'd need more for her rehabilitation fees. This is the only way I could do it. I don't even know what else to say, Yun. You already clearly have the God of Fortune right beside you, and you won't even spare him a glance. Instead, you plan on going the other route by earning that money all by yourself. Wu Wenjing sighed and rested her head on top of her hands. I don't know if I should admire you for your stubbornness or shame you for your stupidity. You know that I don't like spending other people's money. Fine. I know that I couldn't say anything to change your mind, she replied. If you and Auntie need anything, tell me, okay? We've been friends for so many years that you're practically like a sister to me. Don't carry this burden all by yourself. Jianyun sent a heart-shaped emoji and a smile slipped into her lips. She was grateful to have friends like her. The morning had passed quickly, and soon enough, their towering paperwork soon subsided. When it was finally time for their lunch break, Wu Wenjing excitedly approached Jianyun. She clasped her hands together and leaned in closely, looking as if she was about to dish the newest gossip. Hey Yun, have you seen this month's financial report? Jianyun, however, didn't look like she was having the time of her life. Clutching the hot water close to her chest, she clasped a hand over her stomach and stifled a groan. The bags under her eyes looked more apparent, and her face appeared more gaunt under the white light. No, she murmured, what's the matter? Wait, do you have your period? Seeing her exhausted expression, Wu Wenjing furrowed her eyebrows in concern. No. I feel like I'm coming down with a cold. It's just my stomach feels a bit funny. I'll get better soon. With a sigh, she tugged on her friend's arm, prompting her. You said something about Ming's report? That's right. And let me tell you, President Huo is a freaking genius. He's the god above all gods. Who would have thought that Ming's would be so lucky? Wu Wenjing cupped her hands around her chest, imitating a beating heart as she jumped around Jianyun's seat. She beamed at her, fanning the sides of her face as she leaned against the desk. What are you talking about? Jianyun cocked an eyebrow, too lazy to pay attention to her friend's words. Listen to me. Wu Wenjing waved her hand in front of her face. Do you remember the time when Ming's was losing money, when the stock prices were practically falling every single day? Guess what? Ever since President Huo arrived 2 weeks ago, our stock prices are steadily rising. Plus, our budget deficit had stopped. It's as if he's the fairy godmother of companies. 1 minute, we were on the brink of becoming broke, and the next minute, we're already making a profit. Imagine if this continues. Ming's would probably be one of the top companies in the world. That's right, I heard that rumor too. Immediately, almost every single employee in HR department crowded around the cubicle as they echoed her praises. During the CEO meeting this morning, all the shareholders were practically jumping in joy when they saw the report, and it's all thanks to President Huo. Since it was almost time to eat, everyone had decided to disregard their paperwork and instead pay more attention to the gossip at hand. President Huo is truly something. Look at all the decisions he made in the past few days. It's obvious that he had top-notch management experience, and if he continues paving the way for this company, Ming's would definitely be restored back to its former glory. Even Sister Xiao couldn't help but praise the man. And she rarely praised anybody. Although we don't feel any changes, it's obvious that we're doing something right. Someone gave a thumbs up, joining in. Looks like the future for us is limitless now. But it's not like he'd last a few more years, right? Another one sighed. I heard that he usually jumps from company to company, not lasting more than a year in each of them. Even if the other shareholders were interested in handing over a percentage of their stakes, it still wouldn't be enough to move him. Besides, he also has his own company. Makes me think, though, for someone who already has his own company, a very successful one if I might add, Sister Xiao intercepted. Why would he want to become a professional manager? To challenge himself? Everyone shrugged and agreed with that thought. That was the only theory that made sense. One of the young women giggled. I even hear that he's single. God, whoever manages to snag him is lucky. Not only does he have the looks, but he also has the ability to match it. Zhan Yun couldn't help but recall what Ushreli had said the other day back at her studio. The middle-aged woman had mused on how Huo Liancheng had become a professional manager because he was trying to find someone. He threw away his comfort just to search the entire country for a person that they weren't sure he could find. Who was he looking for? She couldn't help but wonder. Whoever it was, it must be someone who was very important to him. All right, enough chatting. Let's eat. Seeing that it was already time, Wu Wenjing pulled on her arm and dragged her into the elevator. Soon enough, all the co-workers followed. On their way to the cafeteria located at the lobby, she peered at Zhan Yun. President Huo is such a catch. Are you sure you're not interested in him? Are you? Is that even a question? If he's standing in front of me right now, I'd take every initiative to pounce on him. Straightening her back, Wu Wenjing resorted to a fighting stance as she brought her fists up to her face. She swayed back and forth to the elevator music, emitting laughter from Zhan Yun. They walked out of the elevator. Then go ahead and pounce on him. Zhan Yun turned her friend towards the other elevator, revealing a handsome man standing behind a group of directors, all of who were considered as high-ranking members in Ming's. Beside him stood Cheng Mu's, who had an easygoing smile on his face, as usual. As soon as she had seen him, Wu Wenjing bit her tongue and dropped her arms to her sides. Her cheeks were tinged bright red, looking like a deer that had been caught on the headlights. Good morning, President Huo, she mumbled. Her voice was high-pitched, and it had sounded as if she had just inhaled a bottle of helium. Seeing him glancing at her, the young woman almost lost her balance in surprise. President Huo. Zhan Yun straightened her back and bowed her head. Huo Liancheng didn't say a word. Instead, he directly walked over them as if they didn't exist. Why didn't you say anything? My whole career is over. Over, I tell you. Wu Wenjing shrieked dramatically as she stared at his retreating figure. Exhaling, she patted her cheeks in anxiety. Her face had turned stark pale as numerous thoughts ran through her mind. Do you think he heard what I said? Fuck. What the hell am I gonna do now? Isn't it better if he hears it? She grinned. Maybe he's giving you a chance to pounce him. Please, the one President Huo really wants to pounce is you, not me. Zhan Yun pinched her arms. Do you want to mess with me again? Wu Wenjing yelped, clutching her arm. Just as she was about to pinch her back, something caught her eye. Her jaw dropped and she quickly slapped Zhan Yun's arm. Look, she pointed excitedly, narrowing her eyes at the band of executives crowding into the cafeteria's entrance. President Huo's going to eating in the staff cafeteria. Do you think they're doing another check? Ah, the food must be hella good today. Let's eat. Before she could say anything else, a voice called out from behind them. Jianyan. She turned around to see Zhou Xiaolong standing in the middle of the hallway. He had a large bouquet of roses, and even a larger smile plastered across his face. Without any hesitation, he walked towards her. Wu Wenjing gasped, nudging her. Aren't you lucky to have all these men sending you flowers? It was already lunch hour, and there were numerous employees walking in and out of the cafeteria. Zhou Xiaolong's handsome looks and his large bouquet of roses were definitely a showstopper, and some of them couldn't help but glance over in jealousy. Her cheeks immediately flushed dark red from the attention as she ducked her head, trying her best to avoid their stares. Ignoring Wu Wenjing's comment, she hurried towards him. I thought you said you'll be going on a business trip today. I didn't go. Zhou Xiaolong handed her the flowers, sheepishly rubbing the back of his neck. I was planning to surprise you here. Zhan Yun stared at the roses for a long time. These were much larger than the ones that she had accepted previously, but even then, that still wasn't enough to make her feel any less uncomfortable. Taking the flowers, she forced a smile. Well, this is definitely a surprise, she commented. Wait, how did you know I was here? Isn't it lunchtime? I thought you'd be here. Zhou Xiaolong glanced at his wristwatch. Actually, the reason I came here was for a business deal. My team would be coming over to form a partnership with Ming's, so I guess we'd be meeting each other more frequently now. Ah? She nodded. Have you eaten yet? Not yet. He gazed passionately at her, taking in her soft lips and bright eyes. Even if he hadn't seen her only for a weekend, he felt as if he had waited an entire lifetime. Why don't we head out then? Zhan Yun offered, glancing warily at the cafeteria. She could feel a pair of cold eyes boring down her back, and she didn't want to bring Zhou Xiaolong into this mess. I don't want to trouble you. Besides, I've always heard that the staff cafeteria in Ming's is pretty good. He grinned. Why don't we eat here for the day? Chapter 63. Love Enemy. Neat Zhen Yun rubbed the back of her neck, peering at the entrance of the cafeteria. The cafeteria is exclusively for Ming's employees, she explained awkwardly. Ah, I may have not thought this through. Zhou Xiaolong scratched his head. He knew that she wasn't lying. After all, there were many company cafeterias that weren't open to the public. Even if his law firm did have dealings with them, he'd still have to report to the director himself before he could get permission to stay for lunch. He sighed, a bit disgruntled by the sudden obstacle. As they worked in two different companies, he couldn't help but worry that some other man would pursue her in his absence. That was partly why he came all the way here in the first place, to be with her, and to make sure that nobody had any ideas of stealing her from him. But it seemed that he hadn't planned enough for this. Then why don't we eat out? He glanced at Wu Wenjing. Will you be joining us, Miss Wu? No thanks, I'd prefer not to third wheel. You two go right ahead. I, for one, will see what delicacies the chef had cooked up for us. Wu Wenjing winked at them, waving her hands repeatedly before racing towards the dining hall. Since President Huo would be eating with them for the day, Wu Wenjing was positive that the chefs would serve them dishes they'd rarely cook every other day. This would mean all of the food on display today would surely be mouth-watering. She licked her lips in anticipation. Although she appreciated her friend, she certainly wasn't going to join in on their date with all the free deliciousness waiting for her in the cafeteria. Let's go. Zhan Yun held the bouquet of roses in her arms, knowing fully well that she didn't have much of a choice in this matter. She turned to the elevator and pressed one of the buttons. Wait for me in the lobby. I'll just get my bag in my office. Sure. She could ask him to wait for a few hours, and Zhou Xiaolong would have agreed the moment she'd asked. Being so moved by her natural beauty, how could he refuse her? The elevator doors opened, but just as she was about to enter, a voice shouted from behind her, Wait! Cheng Mu's ran up to her. His combed-back hair was a bit disheveled, and an easygoing smile was painted across his lips. What was he planning? Zhen Yun peered at him, but he simply winked at her and turned to Zhou Xiaolong. Are you Attorney Zhou? Yes, I am. He pursed his lips. I'm sorry, but I don't seem to know you. Cheng Mu's, the CEO's special assistant. Cheng Mu's extended his hand. Although his face was alight with innocence, there was a glint in his eyes that told her otherwise. Zhou Xiaolong's face immediately lit up, and he clasped the man's hands. Ah, Cheng Muzi, I've heard a lot about you, he said amicably. Although he was slightly overwhelmed by the unexpected attention, he certainly didn't look displeased by it. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard from Director Wang that Ming's and Tengfei law firm would be working together in the future. Since you're one of their best litigators, I was wondering if you'd mind staying and having a meal with us, Cheng Muzi offered. You flatter me too much. I'm simply just doing my job. Zhou Xiaolong boomed in laughter, waving his hand dismissively. His smile widened even further, and he puffed up his chest in pride. Besides, he had initially wanted to eat at Ming's cafeteria in the first place. With this opportunity, it was like hitting two birds with one stone. This way then. Cheng Mu's motioned his hand towards the entrance, and Zhou Xiaolong quickly followed him. Zhan Yun blinked, unsure of what had just happened. If they weren't going out to eat, then that was completely fine with her, but still, something didn't seem right. After all, from what she had known from Zhou Xiaolong's professional life, his resume didn't seem all that impressive. Although he had studied in the States, that still didn't account for him being one of the best. If so, why would Cheng Mu's personally invite him to eat with them? While Zhou Xiaolong was looking around the cafeteria, Zhan Yun took advantage of this distraction and tugged on Cheng Mu's sleeves. She mouthed, What are you planning? Before he could answer, the lawyer turned around in amazement. Your cafeteria is so big, I could probably fit a whole truck here. Her eyes twitched. This is actually one of the first dining halls built in Ming's, Cheng Mu's explained, seeing that the young woman had become silent. The second cafeteria is actually located on the third floor, but it's not as large as this. The cafeteria is filled with people. Zhou Xiaolong gaped at the number of employees entering and exiting the vicinity. We only have a few dozen lawyers back, Tengfei, so it's not as lively as this. It's quite a company. Jian Yun, however, had paid no heed to Zhou Xiaolong's praises. The moment she had entered the dining hall, it was as if her heart had stopped beating and her eardrums had started ringing. It was the first time she had seen the cafeteria so crowded today. And from the looks of it, there were practically no seats left. All the employees were chattering delightfully as they stared in the same direction. Following their lustful and envious stares, she saw Huo Liancheng and a few of Ming's directors sitting at the table located in the middle of the room. Just like every other employee, they also ate from food trays, but there was a certain elegance with the way they were eating. A blush coated her cheeks, and she immediately ducked her head. There was no way she was going to be seen by him, not like this. She dug her fingers into the stems of her bouquet as beads of sweat slid down her forehead. He wasn't even standing close to her, and she was already prepared to die in anxiety. Why do I have such bad luck with these? President Huo would actually be eating with us today. Cheng Muzi glanced at them. Do you mind sitting together with us? Upon hearing that he was going to sit with Ming's CEO, Zhou Xiaolong immediately bit the bullet. It's my honor. I certainly wouldn't mind at all. Mind, Jian Yun wanted to scream out. The last thing she needed was for them to share a table. Under Huo Liancheng's sinister gaze, how could Zhou Xiaolong stand a chance against him? Knowing fully well that this invitation certainly didn't involve any business between the two firms, an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. But even if she didn't want a seat with them, how the hell was she going to refuse? Feeling as if her eyeballs were about to roll out of their sockets, she scanned the proximity, immediately laying eyes on Wu Wenjing. Maybe that was her out. Chen Muzi, she said, trying to sustain the relief in her voice. I actually have a colleague waiting for me over there. I should leave you to it. She was about to sprint towards her friend like a mouse running from a cat, but Zhou Xiaolong pulled her back. Jian Yun, we shouldn't just refuse the invitation. He tried to reason out, glancing furtively at the table in the middle. Unlike her, Zhou Xiaolong was actually excited about the opportunity, and he certainly wasn't going to let anyone ruin it for him. That's right, Miss Jian. President Huo had specifically invited the two of you. Cheng Muzi stared at the way the lawyer was holding her arm, and he couldn't help but push his glasses up the bridge of his nose in contempt. Out of the corners of his eye, he saw Huo Liancheng's darkened features and resisted the urge to smirk. This was going to be an interesting lunch, indeed. A shiver shot down her spine, and Jian Yun subconsciously removed his hold on her. This time, she could see almost every employee staring right at her, as if she had just committed a bank robbery. As a Ming's employee herself, Jian Yun knew how fast gossip flew around here, especially if it concerned any handsome man. And seeing as Cheng Muzi wasn't as inferior to Huo Liancheng in terms of looks, he was certainly at the top of their wish list. With his sunny personality and warm smile, he had attracted quite a lot of admirers in the firm, so standing next to him was enough to garner their attention. Let's go. He smiled meaningfully before turning his back towards her. Knowing that she had no other choice, Jian Yun grudgingly followed him. As soon as they reached the table, Zhou Xiaolong was immediately acquainted with the Commissioner of Legal Affairs as well as Director Wang himself. Just as the director had introduced him to Huo Liancheng, the lawyer extended his hand for him to shake, only to be coldly refused. Zhou Xiaolong's arm fell back to his sides, and the tension around the room thickened. Attorney Zhou, President Huo doesn't like to have any physical contact with strangers, Cheng Muzi quickly explained. He's a bit of a germaphobe, you see. Jian Yun kept her head down the entire time, praying in her heart that they'd pay no attention to her. However, upon seeing the little scene play out right before her eyes, she resisted the urge to scoff. It seemed that the germaphobe struck again. However, Zhou Xiaolong didn't mind at all. Besides being a lawyer himself, he already had his fair share of meeting haughty businessmen, and this was certainly not abnormal behavior. The flowers are beautiful, Huo Liancheng commented. Jian Yun froze as she slowly raised her head, immediately regretting it once she saw him gazing right at her. His fierce eyes were narrowed tremendously, and a trace of coldness flashed in his features. Gone was the warmth she had seen back at the villa. Instead, it was as if his face had reverted back to its normal indifference. At the sight, she lowered her own gaze, only to see that she was still holding the bouquet tightly in her chest. Her cheeks flushed. Chapter 64, Come to my office. I also think the flowers are beautiful, just like Yun, Zhou Xiaolong said intimately, glancing at her. The gloominess in Huo Liancheng's features remained unnoticed by the lawyer as he fawned over the woman sitting right beside him. At President Huo's words, all of them immediately turned to the woman sitting with them. Director Wang's eyes were lit up with jealousy as he stroked his chin, looking deep in thought. Your girlfriend's a Ming's employee, he noted. How come I've never seen her before? You're a very busy person. Besides, my girlfriend's just part of the staff, so it's normal for her to go under your radar. If I had noticed her, I definitely wouldn't let you have her, Director Wang joked, slightly enamored by her beauty. Although there were hundreds of models who were far better looking than her, there was something about her natural looks that seemed like a breath of fresh air. It was definitely a sight to behold. The other managers laughed. Seeing as Attorney Zhou got himself a pretty girl from Ming's, perhaps Director Wang can find a pretty lawyer from your law firm. You're welcome to do so. Seeing as everyone had thought that Jianyun was his girlfriend, he didn't bother denying it. His ego was further inflated in satisfaction, and he inched nearer to her seat. She, on the other hand, didn't seem too pleased about the situation, but she couldn't really do anything about it. Pursing her lips, she inched a bit to the left, farther away from the man. If she had butted in, she'd lose face for the both of them, so it was better not to say anything at all. Chen Luz is single. What do you say about being paired up with an attorney? Since the executives didn't dare joke around with Huo Liancheng, given his detached personality, they decided to pull his special assistant into their conversation. There's no need. I don't like sharp-tongued women. He had already been eating his food, having no interest in joining them with their jokes and teasings. He knew full well if this banter continued, a certain someone would be going on a rampage, and Cheng Luz wasn't going to risk being in the bitter end of his wrath. Seeing his sudden dismissal, everyone immediately fell silent. It seems that you really like Attorney Zhou? Huo Liancheng spoke again. His voice was a little hoarse, and his words were a bit muffled, but they still held a certain resignation in his tone. You've been holding on to the flowers this entire time. Ah. The more she smiled, the more embarrassed she became. Jianyun glanced from one side of the room to another, wishing that the tiled floors could swallow her up this instant. What was she supposed to say? Yes, I really like Attorney Zhou. Aren't these flowers pretty? If she had said that, then Zhou Xiaolong would misunderstand her. Although she found him respectable, he certainly wasn't his type, and she didn't want to keep his hopes up for feelings that weren't there in the first place. But if she said differently, then that would mean that she had been lying to Huo Liancheng about not having a boyfriend. Wouldn't that make the situation even worse? Unable to take the pressure, Jianyun placed the bouquet on an empty seat and stood up. I'll go get some food first, she excused herself. Zhou Xiaolong initially wanted to go with her, but seeing as all the higher-ups were gathered at one table, it would be inappropriate for both of them to leave in one go. Due to this, he glanced up at her. Could you get a tray for me too? She nodded. Sure. Attorney Zhou, your girlfriend's so kind to you. Director Wang gazed at her retreating back, squinting his eyes in appreciation. It seems that both of you love each other very much. How long have you been together? Not long, but our relationship has been good. Zhou Xiaolong laughed, waving his hand. Director Wang was about to say something else when one of the executives nudged him. It was then when he noticed that the atmosphere around them had darkened impeccably, and when he turned to the side, he could see a swirl of rage hidden in Huo Liancheng's eyes. Immediately he stiffened. President Huo, is the food not to your liking? Director Wang asked carefully, feeling as if he was tiptoeing across glass. I lost my appetite. I'll be leaving first. Huo Liancheng suddenly stood up and grabbed his coat from the back of the chair. Kicking the seat to the side, he strode away. As soon as he stood up from his seats, all the ladies in the company couldn't help but sigh and scream. The tight button-up shirt definitely did wonders to his body, and just the mere sight of his muscles rippling under his shirt was enough to make them fan their faces. It was like watching a celebrity from afar. Huo Liancheng couldn't care less about the impression that he had left them, and his cold expression was enough to push anyone away at a moment's notice. Even then, that wasn't enough to stop the women from swooning. So handsome. He's so cool. Look at him. He has a body of a god. Hubby. As there were hundreds of people in the cafeteria, even if Huo Liancheng didn't like to be addressed as is, it wasn't as if he knew who it was. Plus, he wasn't bored enough to investigate the entire scene one by one. This was why the women were brave enough to speak up and show their appreciation of his looks. With a frown, he strode towards the elevator. Despite his absence, the tension still hadn't left the table. Every single one of the Ming's executives looked at one another, wondering who or what had offended him. Even Zhou Xiaolong was trembling in fear. Did I say something to upset him? Of course not. President Huo just lost his appetite. Cheng Muz burst into laughter, waving his hand dismissively. He was certainly not going to tell him the truth of the matter. It was like watching a mouse scurrying towards a mousetrap. He wanted to see the results. Jianyun had just heard screams from a bunch of love-struck employees from the far right, and when she had turned around, she saw that Huo Liancheng left the cafeteria. She heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that she could finally eat in peace this time around. The young woman returned to the table with 2 trays in her hands. Thank you. Zhou Xiaolong smiled up at her. Although she smiled back, she couldn't help but be a little disgruntled over the entire situation. After what had happened today, all the good impression she had of him was slowly dissipating. The only reason Zhou Xiaolong wanted to be here was to stake his claim on her. If their relationship had lasted long enough, she wouldn't have complained, but they had only known each other for a week and a half. Why was he so anxious to tell everyone he was her boyfriend? Did he treat her as some object worth displaying all the time? Jianyun crinkled her nose in disgust. It seemed that she had misjudged him. As time had passed, Director Wang and Zhou Xiaolong grew even more familiar with one another as they talked about their experiences in the industry. Halfway through her meal, Jian Yun's phone rang. When she glanced at her screen, she saw that the call was from Huo Liancheng. She bit her lips. At first, Jian Yun wanted to ignore the call completely, but seeing as the other executives had seen her pick up her phone, the action would seem deliberate. And that certainly wouldn't be good for any of them. With a sigh, her thumb hovered over the screen, unsure of what to do. Zhou Xiaolong quickly turned his head. Your phone's ringing. Why aren't you answering it? Yeah. Afraid that they'd see the caller ID, she quickly swiped the answer button. The moment the call was connected, Huo Liancheng's voice sounded from the other end of the line. Come to my office. No way. Upon hearing his domineering tone, she refused almost immediately. It's either that or I'll go to the cafeteria to look for you, he warned. I'll go. Just as she had agreed, Jian Yun could hear a soft laugh in the background, and she gritted her teeth. Was he really amusing himself with her dilemma? Noticing the bitterness in her expression, Zhou Xiaolong furrowed his eyebrows. Is there something wrong? I am fine. Forcing a smile, she buried her head into her food. She wanted to wait a bit before going, as to not attract any attention from any bystanders. A minute had passed, and she turned, noticing that Zhou Xiaolong and Director Wang were still in the middle of a conversation. With this, she made up an excuse. I'm done eating. I'll be leaving first. Where are you going? He turned to her, furrowing his eyebrows. I'm almost done eating. Just give me a second. I'll just be heading to the bathroom to freshen up. Attorney Zhao, you still have more than half of your food on your plate. Is it because the food on Ming's isn't good? I'll ask the head chef to cook up a few of our specialties. Cheng Mu smiled, attracting his attention. He immediately instructed the chef at the side to prepare even more dishes. This time, the lawyer couldn't refuse his request. Eat with us a little while more. When Jin Yun walked out of the cafeteria, she noticed that hundreds of employees were crowding around the elevator. To avoid being noticed by any of them, she turned around and headed into the fire exit. There was a lounge on the second floor, so no one would see her there. By the time she stood inside the elevator, she sighed and twisted her wrists. It was time to have a very thorough talk with Huo Liancheng, just to clear out the air between them. However, when she stepped into the CEO's office, she noticed that it was empty. Chapter 65. You're going to start a mess with me? Didn't he say that he'd be here? Jian Yun blinked, looking around the CEO's office. The leather seat sitting right behind the oval desk was empty, and her lips pursed at the sight. Despite his absence, she stayed, using the time to observe her surroundings. This was the first time she had ever been in his office, and she had to say, it was everything she had expected it to be, and so much more. The office was lit up with floor-to-ceiling windows, with each of them having a different view of the river streams. Light blue hues blared across the room, creating a halo around the large glass desk in the middle. On the walls were built-in bookshelves and hardwood cabinets, framing the room so symmetrically and perfectly that she felt that this place had just popped out from the covers of an interior design magazine. It was gorgeous. But where was he? Where did he run off to when he had called her over here? Jian Yun pursed her lips. She was about to turn around and leave when she bumped into the man himself. His long fingers fell onto her shoulders, steadying her stumbling figure, and she immediately reeled back in surprise. Where did you come from? She gaped, quickly retreating from his touch as if he was burning her. His presence was like an umbrella, shrouding anyone in close proximity in fear and intimidation. No matter how many times she had been in close contact with him, Jian Yun still couldn't help but stiffen under his presence. Huo Liancheng grabbed her by the waist and pushed her up against the wall. Lowering his head, he whispered, Why are you so distant from me? His dark eyes burned like the raging flames of hell, and his voice was hoarse like a man who had gone through the desert. His cold fingertips clenched around the fabric of her shirt, and her breath hitched somewhat dazed from his sudden action. Jian Yun struggled to break from his hold, but the more she moved, the tighter his grip became. Knowing that she didn't have anywhere else to run, she glared at him as fiercely as she could. You talk as if I've ever been close to you. From what I remember, back at the banquet, you were practically coaxing me to carry you. He raised his eyebrows. Not only that, but you've also... Stop, don't say any more. Her cheeks colored with embarrassment as blurred memories from that night seeped into her mind. The last thing she needed was for someone to remind her of all the things she had gotten herself into while she was intoxicated. I drank too much that night, so I don't remember anything. That doesn't count. You really don't remember? His eyes glinted with amusement. No, she shook her head resolutely. There was no way she was going to admit to the fact that she had wanted him to hug her or had even forced him to kiss her. Straightening her back, Jian Yun squared her shoulders and looked at him straight in the eye, unflinching. No matter how intimidating he was, backing down was the last thing she'd do. You're lying. Huo Liancheng shrugged unhurriedly before taking out his phone. Take a look at this then. Look at what? Her eyebrows furrowed together as she stared at the blackened screen. The video was set in a private garden back at the party. At first, the clip was blurry, and all she could see were blotches of figures moving around the screen. However, in a few seconds, everything started to clear. The moonlight shone around the couple under the camera's lens. There, a tall man was leading a woman out into the parking lot, but after a few seconds the woman stopped and spread her arms. "My foot hurts." She stomped her foot, protesting like a little child. "Carry me." The couple was none other than Huo Liancheng and Jian Yun. Her face burned. At the sight, she reached out to grab his phone, but he quickly extended his arm upwards. No matter how much she jumped or stretched, she still couldn't reach it. Seeing her animated expressions, Huo Liancheng couldn't help but burst into laughter. "Do you remember now? If you still don't, maybe we should play the video again one more time." Just as her fingertips grazed against the screen, she could see that the man in the video had already picked her up. The woman was practically jumping in ecstasy that she not only wrapped her arms around the man's neck, but also smacked his face with a resounding kiss. "Arg!" Jian Yun immediately turned her back and squeezed her eyes shut. Let the phone be damned. She didn't want to see another second of that video. This was just embarrassing. Although she remembered bits and pieces of what had happened that night, this didn't cross her mind for 1 second. God, it was probably best that she didn't remember anything at all. She buried her face deeper into her hands, suppressing the urge to groan in frustration. How could she have done such a thing? "Do you remember now?" His lips twitched. "Why did you record this?" Her voice was tense, sounding like a young girl who had just been bullied. "I didn't." He placed his phone back in his pocket. Someone was secretly taking the video and wanted to sell it to a media outlet. Cheng Muzi stopped it before it went viral. That wasn't a lie. Someone had initially wanted to sell it to a news channel, guaranteeing that this would make the front pages. Why else wouldn't it? Huo Liancheng was practically the most popular man in the business sector, and his looks were clearly up to par with even one of the best celebrities in the world. Just one picture was enough to go viral. What more if there was a video of him and his girlfriend circulating the internet? If the video were to appear online, it would definitely cause a huge uproar. Although he didn't care, he was worried that this may directly affect Jian Yun's life. "Then why would you show me this video?" She hesitated. "You're the one who said that you didn't remember," he teased. There was something about getting on her nerves that entertained him to no end. "Am I not trying to help you recover your memories? So what if I recover them? I was drunk, even if I forced you to carry me, or when I forced you to kiss me. She trailed off, not having the strength to continue her sentence. Her voice had grown faint. Huo Liancheng raised his eyebrows at her words. She had just said that she was the one who had kissed him? His eyes glinted. It seemed that she had really been quite drunk that night. The corners of his lips inched upward as he stared at her. "You forced me to kiss you, and that's it?" He smirked. "So what? After you've taken advantage of me, you plan of just dropping me." "What the fuck?" Surprised by his shamelessness, the obscenities effortlessly tumbled right out of her tongue. Her hands fell to her sides as she gaped at him. "It's just a kiss. It's not even worth mentioning. You're rude for a girl." He poked her on the forehead. "Do you enjoy pissing me off? Haven't you just taken over as Ming's president? Don't you have better things to do?" Jian Yun wanted nothing more than to wipe that smirk off his face. He was clearly saying these things to rile her up, and much to her annoyance, it was working. A small company like Ming's can be settled by Cheng Muzi alone. Huo Liancheng shrugged. "And I find you much more interesting to deal with." Ming's? A small company? The largest enterprise in Qinghu City was small for him? Her eyes twitched. Was he kidding her? At the sight of his impassive face, she could tell that he was serious, leaving her to wonder what other large companies he considered small. "Tell me," she gritted her teeth. "Why do you keep annoying me? Is it because I cursed you back at the coffee shop? I've already apologized, haven't I?" "Oh, it's not that." He placed an arm on the wall, blocking her from escaping his grasp. "Hey." Her heart raced in her chest, ducking her head. "You better stay away from me, or I won't be answering for my actions. And what will you do? Planning to bite me again?" Huo Liancheng tilted his head. Jian Yun snapped. "If you dare kiss me again, I'll buy." Before she could finish her sentence, his lips were already on hers. It took her a second to register what was happening, and when she did, her eyes widened in disbelief. Was he actually kissing her? Again? His soft lips brushed against her skin and a tingle shot down her spine. There was absolutely no way she was going to tolerate this. Her hands clenched as she struggled under his grip. Once she was out of here, he'd better ready himself, because she was going to beat him senseless. Jian Yun tried to gnash her teeth, but it was to no avail either. While his hand was supporting her head, his other hand pinched the sides of her cheeks, making it impossible for her to move her lips. Bastard. If looks could kill, Huo Liancheng would have already dropped dead. "Are you planning to kick me again?" He used his legs to suppress hers, and he moved closer to her ear, whispering seductively. His hot breath fanned the sides of her neck, and she resisted the urge to shudder. "If you disable me there, how will you enjoy it in the future?"